Creativity is at the heart of any life or business transformation. Hi, I'm Paula, host of Rock Your Life TV. In this episode, you will discover the creativity pipeline to the life of your dreams. And when you finish watching, head over to pauladandrea.com/RYLTV, get a free gift, and stay on my guest list. You can't create transformation by fighting the status quo of your life, but you can create something new to take its place. That is creativity. Well, the trouble is that nobody's taught us how to embrace that creativity, to be productive in our creating. And the result, well, many people get trapped and stuck. Creative genius and entrepreneur Morgan Giddings will show you how to get your creative pipeline unstuck to create the life or business of your dreams. And at the end of the day, that is what you really want, isn't it? To be able to be successful in living your dreams, to get to that core level, to really tap into your heart, and to be in flow with yourself, to be who you really are, be doing the things that you want to do, to be successful and to triumph in life. Well, Morgan has done exactly that. She has some really cool concepts. She has a PhD and a Rockn biz to share with you, and she is just really is the epitome of creative transformation. So big rock star salute and warm welcome to Morgan Giddings. Hey, Morgan.
Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate the introduction. It's awesome to be here.
Absolutely. I've followed some of your current videos, and you just have an amazing story that I just want to dive into, because I think that just kind of a couple of things that are oozing out of me right now, talking about creativity and being able to tap into that core level, into your heart space, and really start living from that is, it's about showing up in life with that pipeline to just, bring everything to you. Forget about showing up with a thimble or a spoon or any of those type of things. I love the concept that you've come up with. And I'd love to know how your story has gotten you into this, because I think it's a wonderful and very, very creative approach to building a life and business of your dreams. So,
all right.
Where do you want to start?
Well, I'd actually like to start with something that you just said, which is to show up with a thimble or a spoon versus showing up with something larger. And I recently came up with a metaphor for taking action, and whether that action is effective creating or ineffective creating. Because ultimately, we do create our lives through action. We create results through action. But the question is it really difficult and slow action, or is it effective, leveraged action? And most people don't really think about that, so they're doing the ineffective action. And my analogy is, let's say that you need to dig a trench to, unbury the sewer pipe in your front yard because it's blocked or something. I mean, I actually had that happen one time, and they had to come and dig up the sewer pipe and replace it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what if those guys showed up with teaspoons to dig that trench? They'd be out there for like 3 months digging that trench with the teaspoons, and they'd eventually get it done, especially if they worked really, 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 really hard at it. They're like out there all night digging with their teaspoons frantically. Mm-hmm. They would eventually create a trench. But you're right. But instead, they just showed up with a backhoe, and about 3 hours later of using the backhoe, boom, there's a trench. Replace the pipe, cover it up, and they're all done. So that's an example of highly leveraged, highly effective action versus highly ineffective action. And so I just wanted to mention that. It's a little bit off of what I was going to start with, but it's so true in life. I see so many people who are like that person digging the trench with the teaspoon, just throughout their whole life, stuck doing that and working really, really hard at it, and totally overwhelmed and frustrated at not getting results. And it's like, no, bring in the backhoe. Do the thing that's highly leveraged.
I love that. That is like the perfect analogy to that, and really creates a vivid, because I think that is what happens, and why so many people give up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why they aren't able to, you know, get into that. They may have, you know, something in their heart that is really just, you know, it lives with them and it's ready to explode, but they just aren't able to get there because they aren't leveraging properly. So I think that's an awesome way. So while we're in right there, do you have a tip or two that would, you know, help somebody kind of immediately get into that leverage action, or to maybe define it and get started so that you know, they can get out of a less effective mode and into high gear?
Right. So where to start with that? I mean, that is why I developed the creative pipeline. So the creative pipeline talks about our phases of thought or awareness, because your action, anybody's action, begins in thinking. And it is your thinking that drives the action, and then the action produces some results, and then those results produce a perception of results, which feeds back into your thinking. So there's this loop constantly going on between those three things: your thinking, your perception, and the results, or your thinking, the results, and your perception of them. So there's this loop. And a lot of people think that in their lives that they limit their thinking by the results that they're currently getting. And the only way you can break this loop is actually by changing your thinking, not by changing your circumstance or your results. So a lot of people, like when they set out to create a business, well, I'll take more time off and I'll hire some employees and I'll do the more highly leveraged stuff when I make $1 million. No, you've got to start by acting as if you were that person who's making $1 million already, and through the kind of thinking that you exude through that process, you will take the actions that get the results that get you the $1 million business, right? Okay. So it's, everybody has it reversed.
They have it reversed, but here's the thing too: is that what I find is that you know, if something, you know, I opened up and I said something about, you know, you can't create transformation by fighting the status quo of your life. If somebody's status quo has been a certain level of income, it is kind of hard for them to wrap themselves around that, even though like their heart just, you know, soars like, wow, you know, like, oh, my life changed and how much could be going on. So let's like dig into that for a second. Like, how do you shift somebody into to get you know, to get that $1 million mind, like right off the bat, without going through what's your process?
Well, so my process is actually an incremental one, because I think most people, if they're, let's say, at 100K per year in their business and they want $1 million business, they just can't fathom. It's too large of a gap between those two things. And so if they try to picture or visualize themselves into that $1 million business, there's just all of these limiting beliefs and counterintentions that come up in that process that will block the ability to immediately go for that, and in fact often cause a reduction in income instead of the thing that you want, which is an increase. So it's a lot better to set, in many cases, a more incremental goal, to say, okay, so I'm at 100K now in my business, let me set a goal of 150K. Let me see how I can expand it that way without working more. That's a key. If you're working harder, then you're going to start getting resistance from the fact that you're working harder at it. So how can I increase my income this year to 150K without working harder? And in order to do that, again, I believe that you have to get all of the parts of this creative pipeline working together. So let me just briefly mention what those are. Okay. It starts with vision. And vision is it defines the direction of anything that you do. And if there's no vision, there's no direction. You're wandering around like an ocean-going vessel without a destination. You're just wandering around on the ocean. So you've got to have that vision of where you're going first. It defines the direction. Then from that, you have inspiration and intuition that flows of, okay, now I have this solid vision and it's exciting. Okay, here's an inspired idea. Here's an intuition about who I should call or what I should do or what I should write, for example. And then we have analysis, which is thinking through things analytically. And that is, you know, traditionally like calculation or whatever, you know, just making plans, making specific plans for how to make something happen. And then the final phase is memory, which encapsulates beliefs and habits. Okay, so those are the 4 stages of the creative pipeline. And what ends up happening for most people who are stuck is they're operating completely out of those lower 2 phases, out of analysis and out of memory and habit, belief and habit. And they don't have the vision and they don't have the intuition, or if they do, it's being blocked because they get a vision of like, oh yeah, I'd like to have $1 million business, but then their beliefs and their habits are the opposite of that. They are counter to that vision, and so they block it, and it never happens. It never occurs in their life. It never manifests.
And so true, and it's you know, and it is because there are some people out there who have, you know, just unbelievable brilliance, but they just can't get it together.
Right.
So I guess where in your life could you point to that that helped you kind of like get it together? Because I know that you've had successes in different fields, and then now you've started this business with a very, very small investment, and just really, you know, I mean, you're rocking it. So
yeah.
I mean, you know, give me some of that, you know, because
right.
You know, everybody does that, and I think it's the one thing that, you know, somebody might hear from you, from another guest, from me, as, you know, to rock your life, that, you know, all of a sudden it's going to make sense. You know, you're also, I think a lot of times when people are stuck, there's a certain level of pain to that. There's a mental anguish. There's, you know, people are just like beating themselves up against the wall, and it's like, you know, when you know that you have raw talent and you do have these dreams, but you just can't exact it, you know, it's frustrating as all heck. You know, that
yes,
there's a lot of people that are walking around like that, like just, you know, and so then they're like, okay, well then, you know, I'll just do the job.
Right.
You know.
And then they just stay stuck.
Yeah, and they just don't advance anywhere, and I think it really is also, it goes back to that what I also opened up with about being able to get to that core level of yourself, so that you're able to get out of those what I like to call them BUIs, behaviors under the influence, kind of my little riff on a DUI. So it's all of those things perhaps that keep you in that lower paradigm. And the habits and the thinking and stuff that have just been layered on, that, you know, it's not really true to who you are. Because when you get into that spot of knowing who you are, owning it more, and really stepping into it, you know, stepping into your life, and then you can step into your business, you can step into your relations, you can, you know, you can get out there and just, you know, enjoy the successes, because you have more accessible to you. And it's also like you know, it allows you to expand. When you're stuck, you're just suffocating so many things, so many aspects of yourself that don't have a chance to go anywhere. So there's always
right.
kind of
they're
like
unexpressed
kind of feel that people have, and you're unexpressed, and when you're able to tap into that, you know, then there's a whole nother life that comes out. Your creativity does come into flow. Your brilliance is allowed to shine. You're able to express how you feel, in what is in your heart. And I know there's many people, you know, from artists to scientists to, you know, you name it, leaders, you know, who have really gotten out of that pain, gotten out of their way to push through ahead, to be able to reveal that aspect of themselves, and bring, you know, some really great innovations to the world.
Yeah.
What it's called, I like to call it adding to the hum of the world, and I think that's the part that everybody plays in this genius game. So.
Yeah, I love it. Well, so you sort of asked whether I had some story that I could tell about this, and I actually have a sort of two-part story for how I came across the importance of creativity and this model of the creative pipeline, how I have all successful people that I've seen are using something very much like this.
Mm-hmm.
So it started when I was a professor teaching at UNC Chapel Hill, and it's a very prestigious public university. one of the top 5 in the nation, and I had these graduate students that I was responsible for teaching them how to do science. And we had this very rigorous testing process that they had to go through in order to be accepted as PhD students, as official PhD students. And during that process, we would always assess their analytical skills. We would say, you know, are they being analytical enough to be a good scientist? And what's interesting is,
and can I ask, what does that mean, like analytical enough?
Well, that means like, you know, breaking down a problem and thinking through it rationally, step by step. You know, thinking through it logically, sort of in a way like a computer would, to really break it down. Like, let's say you're playing a game of chess. Well, if you want to win at chess, you've got to break it down and think through it sort of analytically, step by step. Well, if I move here, how could my opponent move that might capture my piece?
So it's kind of like being one step ahead.
Exactly. So
that would be useful for anybody, you know.
Right. Right. So it's an incredibly important skill that needs to be developed. But I saw all of this concentration on that, and yet the students would struggle with something else. There was no focus on, no concentration on, which is they had to come up with a hypothesis for how certain things were working. They had to just like go read papers, scientific papers, and come up with their own unique hypothesis about what was going on. And I looked at that and said, huh, that's different than this analytical stuff. That's like creativity. Then I started studying it and realizing that all the great scientists, every single one of them, used creativity and came up with fantastic new hypotheses. You think about, why do we all know Einstein's name? Well, it's because he came up with the theory of relativity. That's a new hypothesis. He created that. That was a creative thing that he did. So I started looking around and saying, oh my God, you know, all the great scientists are being creative, and that's why I've gotten to where I have in my life as a scientist. Okay, why aren't we teaching any of this? Zero, zip, nada, nothing. Nobody pays attention to it. Nobody talks about it. Nobody does anything. Nobody tests it. And I was just like floored. And then I started comparing the students who did really well to the ones who really struggled. The ones who did really well were creative. They were creatively productive. So they took creative ideas and they acted on them and made them happen. And the ones who struggled had some block in that process. And so, you know, the background behind why this is the case is that I think we have gone overboard in a certain direction in our world. So we started out, you know, back in medieval times as very superstitious people. I mean, we started out long before that, but let's just look at that period. What's that?
From that time, because I think that's kind of like where, you know, most people can wrap their heads around.
Exactly. So during that time, you know, people of Western lineage we were very superstitious, and we believed in magic and ghosts and all of this stuff that you know, some of which was a little bit over the top. And so in came the Renaissance and sort of looked at that and said, you know, a lot of that stuff is superstition. A lot of it is sort of hard to justify, and a lot of it is nonsense. So let's bring in this analytical thinking to really start measuring and understanding what is real and what is not real. Which, you know, there's a balance between those two things, right? But what happened is we've now gone so far to that extreme that we've completely taken the spirit, the heart, the you know, whatever you want to call it, the deeper things, completely out of the equation. And so current science operates on what I call a materialist paradigm, where we think that, for example, the thinking that we do in our heads comes from the movements of molecules and nothing else. And that if you stop the molecules moving, there is no spirit, there's nothing remaining. It's just that our spirit, our activity is a byproduct of these bouncing molecules, and that's all it is. And I think that's an incredibly flawed view. Like, we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater. But that's what most people receive in their schooling, is this notion that, well, you know, if there is a God, God is very separate. You know, it's this guy up there in the sky looking down on us. And if we have a spirit, it's something completely separate, but it's not here and present with us now. And so it's this massive divide that has occurred. And I think we really need to bring that divide back together to say, okay, there's a validity to this analytical scientific thinking, a certain validity to it, but we need to also understand that there's a lot of stuff it does not understand about how thought works. What is awareness? What is consciousness? And what is creativity? And it hasn't been looking at those things. And that's why we've ignored it.
Yeah, in large part. And, you know, there is definitely, you know, I think they go towards the logic to give a very tangible kind of a forum to open that up, because and it's true. I agree with you. I think that there's right now there's a lot of opening up into a light-bearing era where people are starting to recognize, because when you look at someone who, let's take Da Vinci for instance, because he's my favorite guys. So
he's awesome.
There was something more than science to what he was doing. There was passion. There was something that lived inside of him that, you know, he would look beyond what was really there.
Exactly.
To be able to take it in, and I think that, you know, I believe that creative people have the ability to do that.
They look into the future.
Yeah, and they well, not only that, it's in their observance that they're able to actually nurture their, you know, what they're looking at, because they can see beyond the obvious.
Yes.
And I think that's really where, you know, what it's about. And, you know, although I'm sure that they heard, oh, you're crazy, you're a freak, you're never going to get anywhere, all that kind of thing, they stuck with it. Because they believed in their heart, and they saw something that was different than what everybody else was seeing. And I think that still holds true today for anybody that's out there that wants to follow their dreams and get into this creative life.
Yeah, and that's why I put vision and inspiration in front of analysis. See, the problem is that your analysis, your rational, logical thinking, cannot fathom the possibilities of the future. It just can't. It's not possible. It's too limited to do that. We can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow or next week. Look at our attempts to predict the weather. I mean, for the last 3 years, I've been amazed how poor the weather predictions here are in Boise when they say it's going to be sunny here today and then it's raining outside. It's like, really? You know, your predictions are that bad?
I think there's a whole lot of other elements that are going back to happening now that lend themselves to traditional tracking. So.
Right. But so what ends up stifling creativity so often is that we try to use the analysis part of our minds to fathom what we could create and to analyze it and to understand it, and is it going to be successful or is it going to fail or whatever. And the answer to that is you cannot fathom that. It is impossible to fathom. Even the most powerful supercomputer on the planet cannot predict whether something is going to succeed or fail, or how it will succeed or how it will fail. So people get paralyzed because they're trying to sit here and analyze it, like using the computer part of their brains, and they get stuck in that analysis paralysis is exactly what that is, instead of the understanding that you've just got to have a sort of faith in that intuition and in that inspiration and move forward, and use the analysis to help you move forward more effectively, but not use the analysis to try to figure out whether this thing is going to work or not, because it will never give you the answer.
Okay, so are you saying then, you know, it's more useful to step more into your being?
Yeah.
That, you know, I think one of the things when I speak with people on subjects, and let's just say a little bit about, you know, as a visionary, as looking at potential and possibility, as you know, maybe even a little metaphysical, is that just be and open up that space to allow it to come in. There's incredible knowledge that is in the body, that can feed the heart, that can feed the mind, that, you know, allows you to expand into more of who you are, to be able to really have that accessibility and have the knowing, which is some people I think refer to as intuitive, and I think those are words that kind of scare people because they don't, I don't have that. Everybody is intuitive. It's really a matter of development. And
it's covered up.
And really it comes into, having a belief in yourself, first of all, and then, letting it expand into more. So take us into the next step of your journey.
Well, yeah, so one of the things that the analysis does for us, why this analysis even exists in our brains in the first place, is it's there to protect us. It's there to help us understand if we walk up to the edge of a cliff and look over the cliff and look down and say, project one step forward and say, if I walk off this cliff, I might die, right? And that's why it's part of our brains. That's why we have analysis to protect us in this world. And what ends up happening is that because of fears, because of worries that are often unfounded, we shut down the creativity because we are stuck in analysis which comes from fears about things. Fear of failure, fear of risk, fear of other people's perceptions. And I have a very big story with that. My creative pipeline, I mean, while you could say, hey, Morgan was successful because she was this professor at a prestigious university, compared to what I felt like I could be doing, I felt very, very unsuccessful in that period in my life. I looked around and said, I could be doing 10 times as much as I'm doing, but I'm not doing it. Why am I not doing it? And it turns out that it was because I wasn't being true to myself. I was not expressing who I truly was and being honest and being open about that. And so that was leading to all sorts of fears that got me stuck in that kind of analysis. And my creative pipeline was totally shut down. Or not totally, but 90% shut down. And so I was taking very ineffective actions most of the time and working really, really hard at it, just like that person digging with that spoon.
Yeah.
So do you want me to describe what that blockage was?
I'd love to hear it, because I think that, a lot of people actually live in that space where they're really the analytic part of their brain in the fear is judgment of themselves. And they just keep on, cycling through, really mental anguish, just by repeating a certain story or a certain loop, like you were talking about before about that loop,
Right.
And that's exactly what people do. They just like loop and loop and loop, and it's like, and then there's this other part where you hear this heart that's beating, going, pick me, like,
yeah.
Leave the brain alone and turn
Listen
to me. So listen to this part of me, because this is the one that can speak more loudly and will, really get you out of a lot of those fears and where you're holding back. So.
Yeah, well, so if there's a fear of judgment operating, which, like, I agree with you, I think there is, let me tell you this story then. So I was born, and I was born in a body of a boy. I had all the boy parts. And I would look at these boy parts. I remember a specific time, it was 3rd grade. I was in the boys' room because, that's how the world classified me. They said, oh, this person has boy parts, must be a boy. So I was in the boys' room. I was at a urinal next to another boy who was from Vietnam and had had an unfortunate accident with his penis, where somehow in the Vietnam War it had been like mostly cut off. And I remember looking at that and saying, wow, wouldn't that be great? And that was like the first very clear thing to me, like, I'm not normal here. Most boys probably aren't walking around looking at somebody who had an accident where a big part of that was removed and who want that to happen. And so I struggled with it. It's like, my God, this is a nightmare. I mean, so I was growing up in Mormon, Utah, a very conservative place. And my father, although he wasn't Mormon, he was still very traditional. He wanted boys, and he wanted his boys to be involved in sports and science and these very, masculine activities, traditionally masculine activities. And so I followed that path because I was so afraid of expressing this to anyone. I kept it inside, and in fact, not only did I keep it inside, I put on a cover of basically being more in the opposite direction, being more aggressive, more masculine, more macho. I mean, I got in fights sometimes, not to the extreme of being thrown in jail for fights, but I got in more fights than, you know, the typical person might. And I also slept with a lot of women, you know, to prove that this wasn't the case. And boy, so, you know, repressing that and having all the fear of judgment just really shut down that creative pipeline. And it was very interesting. There were a few bouts during my life when I was in college and in graduate school, and a few times like that when I was just like, you know what, I'm going to do something about this. And so I would start, you know, taking maybe some hormones and you know, dressing up more often in what I felt was really authentic to me. And then, like, pretty quickly somebody would say something or whatever, something would happen. Not many people knew even much, but they'd see me dressed up or something and be like, what's that about? And then I'd shut it down and I'd say, no, this is awful. I put it back in the closet. But it was during those times that I made big creative leaps. I never associated that at the time. But then it was when I was in my faculty job. I was a few years in. I was really struggling. My grants were not being funded at the time. I was just trying one grant proposal after another. And these are essential to keep your job as a faculty member in a place like I was. You have to have grants to succeed. Otherwise, you're going to be out on your butt. And I wasn't getting my grants funded. And I was suicidal, and I was just feeling depressed and anxious and nervous and just really in a bad place. And then I found out that my wife was pregnant with our first daughter. And I was like, wow, this is screwed up. What am I going to do about this? You know, I can't, like, if I commit suicide, that would be the lamest thing that I could possibly do for this being, because my mother was absent when I was growing up. She had left. And so do I want to continue this chain of absent parents? Okay, that's not an option. I can't do that to her. So what else can I do? Well, I could live for 20 more years hiding this all inside. But what kind of person am I going to be at the end of this 20 years? I'm already bitter and negative and feeling frustrated and anxious and suicidal. What's that going to be like in 20 more years? It's going to be awful. And in fact, I had read a book by somebody who had done exactly that. And by the time she finally acknowledged that inner part of herself and made that transition from being male in society to female, her family rejected her, and she had extreme struggles with the whole thing. And I looked at that and said, I can't do that either. So I just have to come out with this. I have to tell this story, and I'll, you know, and see what happens. And if everybody rejects me, at least I can start over from, you know, with a fresh footing, being who I truly am. And hopefully I'll at least have some interaction with this daughter. So I came out with the story. I started by telling close friends and family, and people were shocked, to say the least, because again, I had overemphasized the masculine, the macho. And they're like, really? No, you got to be joking. But I managed to convince people, and surprisingly enough, very few people, you know, had a strong negative reaction. A few people were kind of like, oh, that's a little bit weird. I don't want to talk to you anymore for a little while. But overall, my colleagues were incredibly accepting. Even my spouse, who'd been married to me at that point for, I think, 7 years, and we'd been together for like 13, she said, well, I don't really like this, but I'm not just going to immediately reject you. I'm going to see what happens and see if something good comes out of this. And that was incredibly open-minded of her. And
absolutely.
You know, later on, she said, looking back, well, I do miss certain aspects of having a husband, but I also had, I got a friend in the process, a true friend, rather than just somebody who's like, you know, a husband. So she was able to look at the positive sides of it. And from the get-go, I was authentically me with my daughter. And that was that's been so powerful. She's a wonderful girl, and we have 2 more daughters, and they're just like, so many people comment, these are such well-behaved kids, and it's like, well, it's because they have people who are being authentic around them. I think that's really the thing. It's just like, we don't expect them to be inauthentic because we're authentic. We want everybody in the family to be authentic, right? And here's the most important thing, that's relevant to people here is that after I went through that transition, within 6 months, I got my first big grant, $1 million grant funded. 6 months later, another $1 million grant funded.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's like, what's going on? And when I would sit down and write these grants, now that I was being authentically me, it was easy. It was just like it flowed right out of me. I was like, that was a cake. Previous grant proposals had been a struggle.
Absolutely, and that's the expansion that that we're talking about is that when you're able to, own who you are, to step into that aspect of yourself. I say calling yourself back to love, which is the law of vibration, which is probably all those little molecules that are bouncing around in your head and elsewhere in your body. That's the vibration of who you are, and when you're able to, step into that. Then the law of attraction, which are the $1 million grants, are in there. I love what you share. It's probably one of the most rewarding experiences in relationships you have to have is with your daughter. I mean, that's absolutely beautiful, or daughters, I should say. But really, of making that decision to be that for her and to be that role model. And really, this is really what Rock Your Life is. This is a full celebration of who you are and really stepping into that. And and all of the fears, I love that because people have all sorts of things that hold them back. But this is truly, what you just shared is truly a courageous decision. It is really stepping, full-blown past any fears that most people have, and really making a huge change in your life. And the reward is that you're you, and you're out there in the world, and things are happening.
Yeah.
And so it is, being able to step past those blocks and just open up, because it sounds like almost like, and I guess I kind of say that like that pipeline. It's like a floodgate of just like zoom, like all this stuff just comes flying through, and it's like, like really, rocket speed almost. Is that once that was able to you just pop that and were able to,
well,
shift who you are, Morgan. I mean, it's just. It's phenomenal.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's been interesting even after going through that. So that was back in 2004 that I started going into this role, and then I had a few years later I had, quote, the surgery that was like the irreversible one, and so I've been living like this for almost 10 years now. But honestly, I wasn't 100% of the way there until very recently. I had, although I didn't hide who I was previously, I didn't actively tell people about it. Like if I would meet somebody, most people are surprised when they hear that because I come across as pretty feminine and whatever. So most people are pretty surprised. And I wouldn't tell people until very late in the relationship, and then they're like, wow, really? Oh my, I'm so surprised. So it's kind of, even though I wasn't actively hiding it, I wasn't actively expressing it. And it's interesting that in my business, I've succeeded to a great degree, but I had a mentor this last summer who had me do this exercise called the liar and fraud exercise, where I just said, you know what, here's why I feel like I am a fraud, why I am a liar. And it all comes back to this story that I've been hiding from everybody. And I just wrote about this story in just raw honesty. And I posted it on some of the business groups that I participate in, and people were floored. I mean, not in a negative way, just in such a positive way. The raw honesty of it, they were like, yes, go.
Yeah, because I think that it is that, it's, it isn't a small thing. It is very, it's probably one of the biggest transformations that you can make on an emotional level, on a physical level, on an intellectual level. And I do want to hear, to wrap up, a little bit about that, about some of the maybe like the top things in each of those areas that you really had to wrap your head around to, to go forward and be in there. And it is kind of like, sometimes when we look at some of the things that are holding us back in the fears that we have, and when you get over to that other side, you know, I mean, oh, what the hell took me so long? Like, I can't believe that. You know, I was like such in a mind blank over that for like so long. But you know, and it is when people hear like something that's bigger than some of the things that, you know, that they feel, that it does it. You know, it is totally inspirational, and it allows them to step forward. So in many ways, Morgan, you're a catalyst for a lot of people, as well as, you know, helping them like really open up that creative pipeline and get unstuck. So.
Yeah.
Big things in each of the, you know, like on a spiritual side, on an energetic side, emotional side, physical, intellect. Some of the things that you really had to, you know, face and own, embrace, and let go of to get
Right. Well, I sense that, I guess the biggest thing is, it goes back to this divide that I talked about near the beginning. The divide between the sort of rational, analytical, which is often associated with maleness in this society, versus the more intuitive, sort of feeling side of things, which is often associated with femaleness. And I think we've done a real disservice to our entire population, to ourselves, to have those be so divided as they are. Because you mentioned Da Vinci earlier. I think Da Vinci was very intuitive, very feeling-oriented in his work, and you can just kind of sense that in looking at the work. Mm-hmm. But if you were a person doing that today as a male, you would be suspect, because you would be a little bit too touchy-feely, a little bit too flighty. And so I think there's this big divide, and what my own transition allowed me to do is bring those two parts together, because it's not like we want to throw the analytical out the window. It still has a role, but we've been overusing it and underusing this other part. Mm-hmm. For most of us. But and some people go the opposite direction. They're totally the touchy-feely, but they never bring any rational analysis to things, to think through things, and so they're just flighty and all over the map. And it's like you have to have both working together, and that's probably the biggest lesson. Like, if you could take one home, if everybody could take one home, is it's, you know, work on getting all of those parts working together. Work on tapping into the intuitive, the inspirational, the vision, but also work on developing some of your analytical tools, and not being afraid of that, and saying those can be supportive rather than something negative, which I think a lot of people who are on the intuitive side have negative associations with those things. But they don't have to be negative. They can be supportive on that journey. They can help you get there more efficiently and more effectively.
I love that. I love what you're saying in there too, because, you know what, hey, I want that part of my brain to be working that says don't step over that cliff. You know what I mean? That's, you know, kind of like danger, danger. And screaming out that, and I do value my other, you know, my lighter side. You know, and I think it is about that, about, you know, finding the harmony and allowing yourself to be in your vibration, you know, to really, and I, you know, when I work with people on bringing them out of their cycles of pain, their dark side, all the things that they're dealing with, it is that, it's about bringing yourself into a harmony of, all the dimensions that make you, you know, who you are. To be able to, like, you know, the more of your resources, your true resources, the raw, the vulnerabilities, the honesty, the passion, everything is when you really get to the core level of that, then we are definitely getting into that creative pipeline.
Yeah.
To live the life of your dreams. So.
Well, and I think the one other point or hint I would give is related to fear, and exactly what you said. So I think when people start trying to do this, it's easy to get into that fear mode, and you mentioned walking off a cliff. And yes, we should use our analysis to make sure we're not about to walk off a cliff and totally destroy ourselves financially or physically. And we should analyze that, but we shouldn't analyze the small things.
And I like that too, is that, back up there for 1 second, I mean to interrupt you, but like that, like walking off a cliff could be that. It's, you know, kind of use that as a, like a physical kind of a thing, but going into a wrong relationship going into a wrong job, you know, bringing about financial demise. All of those types of things are walking off a cliff.
Well, some people see them as that, but then if you look at the bigger picture perspective, many of those things are just steps along the path. I mean, you know, I know so many people who have lost everything. In fact, Trump did this, lost everything, went bankrupt. Next year, he's multimillionaire again, right? So I know a lot of people who were truly wiped out financially, but as long as they weren't wiped out mentally, they made all the money back and then some. And the same thing with a bad relationship. I mean, unless it's literally such an abusive relationship such that, you know, you suffer permanent scars, you go into a bad relationship, you have some bad experiences, you end the relationship, hopefully, and then you learn more about what you want. So I consider many of those things small failures. And this is the trouble, is people don't distinguish between small failures, which you can move on and learn from, versus the big, truly risky failures. Because like if you get cancer and don't recover from that, well, then you're done, right? Or if you literally walk off a cliff, you're pretty much done, unless you're really lucky. Whereas, you know, again, a bad relationship, mostly recoverable from. So, and this is what blocks people creatively, is we have this model of work that if we put in enough hours that we'll get the payoff. And so that means work harder, more likely to get payoff. And that's not how it works. We have to put in enough failures before we get the payoff. And we don't know how many failures it's going to take, but certainly the more we learn from the failures that we do have, the quicker we will get to the payoff. Because the payoffs are huge. I mean, you think about a novelist like Stephen King, not every, you know, who's prolific. He's just written one after another, after another, after another, right? But not every single one of his novels was the same level of success. Some of them were kind of, quote, failures, whereas others were just huge blockbuster successes. And this is true of, like, I love the Coen brothers as filmmakers, but I don't like every one of their films, and not every one of their films is successful. So anybody who is a creator has to take that risk of the small failures. And if they're not willing to embrace that risk, they are going to remain stuck. So it's differentiating between the big sort of life-threatening failures versus the small failures where, okay, I wasted a little time, I was a little bit embarrassed, whatever, I put this novel out there that people didn't like that much, okay, let me try the next novel. Let me learn from that first experience. Versus spending 20 years to try to, quote, perfect the novel, then getting it out there and having it still fail. I mean, which would you rather do? Spend 6 months on it and have it fail, or spend 20 years trying to perfect it and then have it fail?
Yeah, and that is exactly what a lot of people do. Is you know, been there, done there in the long trajectory. You know, like, and it's not fun. So I can say that safely. Get yourself out there.
Yeah.
And I thank you so much for sharing all of you, all of your, you know, your story, your knowledge. Certainly, the creativity pipeline is something for people to be exposed to. So, how could they find you, and what do you have in store for them?
Yeah. So they can go to creative-productivity.com/rockstar. And what I've done is made a video series for them that actually walks through some of the brain science associated with this. So we haven't had time to go into a little bit deeper thing about, for example, the importance of quiet time and how if you're overworking, you're actually going backwards. So I have a video that I made specifically about that, and that talks about that brain science and how you can take advantage of it. And then I talk about what's called the ideal perfect day exercise that really gets people thinking and doing some work on, am I in the right direction or in the wrong direction? And I have several things like that for you in store. So it's, the URL is also on my on the bottom of my screen. Hopefully you can see that. And
I'll list it for people as well. They'll be able to click. It will be in the information section as well, so that people can actually read it. And if they're online, they should be able to click through to it. I thank you so much, because that's an awesome gift. And I will have you back so that we can get into that discussion.
Okay, fantastic.
So thank you so much for,
thank you.
For everything, Morgan, for being who you are and getting out there and rocking the world, because you're making me a better place for everybody. So
awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm Paula D'Andrea for Rock Your Life TV. Remember to head over to pauladandrea.com/RYLTV. Get on the guest list so that you can stay in touch with people who rock, add some value to your life, rock your life, and be happy, be prosperous, be free. Thanks for watching.